Sometimes the cruelest truth is learning that the family who raised you never wanted you at all. That's the reality Lyralei discovered when she turned 18, when the mark on her shoulder began to burn like liquid fire, and when the woman she'd called mother finally spoke the words that shattered her world. You were never meant to survive. But this story isn't just about abandonment. It's about a girl born with a curse so powerful that even her own parents couldn't bear to keep her. Yet an alpha king would one day kill thousands just to make her his queen. It's about prophecies that demand sacrifice, about love that transcends fear, and about discovering that sometimes what the world calls a curse is actually the greatest blessing you could ever receive. The village of Thornwick had always whispered about Lyralei Ashcroft, though she'd never understood why until the morning her 18th birthday arrived with blood and revelation. She'd grown up believing she was the unwanted daughter of Mira and Jorik Ashcroft, humble farmers who'd taken her in out of duty to a distant relative. The story never quite made sense. She looked nothing like either of them, her midnight black hair and violet eyes stark against their sandy browns and muddy greens. But Lyralei had learned early not to ask questions that made Mira's hands shake and Jorik's jaw clench. Instead, she'd poured herself into the one thing that brought her peace, her strange ability to sense the emotions of every living creature around her. Plants wilted when she was sad, animals followed her like she was their pack leader, and people either loved her instantly or feared her without knowing why. It's not natural, she'd heard Mira whisper to Jorik countless times. The way she knows things, the way everything bends to her will. Keep your voice down, Jorik would always reply. But his eyes would find Lyralei across the room with something that looked dangerously close to terror. The morning everything changed began like any other. Lyralei woke before dawn to tend the animals, her bare feet silent on the worn wooden floors. But as she reached for her cloak, a searing pain shot through her left shoulder blade, so intense she collapsed to her knees with a strangled cry. When she managed to twist around and look, she saw it, a mark she'd never noticed before, now glowing with silver light. It looked like a crescent moon wrapped in thorns, and it pulsed with each beat of her heart. No, came Mira's voice from the doorway, sharp with panic. Not yet. She's not supposed to manifest yet. What's happening to me? Lyralei gasped, the pain spreading through her veins like molten metal. But instead of comfort, instead of the motherly concern she desperately needed, Mira stepped backward. Jorik, she called, her voice breaking. It's time. The mark is awakening. Jorik appeared within moments, took one look at Lyralei writhing on the floor, and something in his face crumbled. 18 years, he whispered. We had 18 years. What are you talking about? Lyralei struggled to stand, but the pain drove her back down. Please, I don't understand. Mira's hands trembled as she pressed them to her mouth. We should have told her. We should have prepared her. Told me what? The words came out as a snarl, and Lyralei felt something wild and powerful stirring in her chest. The air around her began to shimmer with heat. You're not ours, Jorik said finally, the words falling like stones into still water. You never were. Your real parents left you on our doorstep with nothing but a letter and a warning. The world tilted. What warning? That you were cursed? Mira whispered. That you would bring either salvation or destruction to the wolf packs. That whoever raised you would have to give you up when the mark appeared, or watch their entire bloodline burn. Lyralei stared at them, these people who had fed her and housed her and never once made her feel truly wanted. You've known my whole life that I was cursed, and you said nothing? We hoped it wouldn't manifest, Jorik said desperately. Some bloodline curses skip generations. You thought maybe you could keep your unwanted burden quiet and controllable. Lyralei finished, and her voice carried a power that made the windows rattle. How long have you been counting down the days until you could be rid of me? Neither of them answered, but the guilt written across their faces was answer enough. The pain in her shoulder was spreading, and with it came a clarity that cut like a blade. She could sense every emotion in the room. Mira's relief mixed with shame. Yorick's fear battling with something that might have been love, and her own rage burning bright enough to set the world on fire. "The letter," she said quietly. "Where is it?" Lyralei, Mira started. "Where is the letter my real parents left?" Yorick disappeared into their bedroom and returned with a piece of parchment that looked ancient, the edges brown with age. With shaking hands, Lyralei unfolded it and read words that changed everything. "To whoever finds this child, her name is Lyralei, and she carries the Moonshard Curse in her blood. She is the daughter of prophecy, born to either unite the packs under one rule or destroy them all. When the mark awakens on her 18th birthday, she must be brought to the Shadowmere territories, where Alpha King Theron Nightwhisper waits. He alone can break the curse, but only if she comes to him willingly. We cannot keep her, for the curse will kill us all. Please forgive us, and please forgive her for what she may become." Lyralei read the letter 3 times before its meaning fully sank in. She wasn't just cursed, she was prophesied, and somewhere in the feared Shadowmere territories, an Alpha King was waiting for her. "Theron Nightwhisper," she whispered, and the name sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with fear. "They say he's the most powerful Alpha who ever lived," Yorick said quietly. "That he's never been defeated in battle, never taken a mate, never shown mercy to his enemies. They also say," Mira added reluctantly, "that he's been searching for something for the past decade. Someone, and that he'll destroy anyone who gets in his way." Lyralei folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her pocket. The pain in her shoulder had settled into a steady throb, and she could feel something awakening inside her. Something vast and dangerous and completely beyond her control. "I have to go to him," she said simply. "No." Mira stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. "Lyralei, you don't understand. The Shadowmere territories are death for anyone who enters uninvited. And he's not just an Alpha King, he's a monster." But Lyralei was already moving toward the door, and with each step, she felt stronger, more certain. "Maybe," she said, looking back at the only family she'd ever known. "But according to this letter, so am I." The road to Shadowmere stretched before Lyralei like a wound carved into the earth, dark and forbidding under the pale morning sky. She'd left Thornwick with nothing but the clothes on her back, the letter in her pocket, and a heart hardened by 18 years of conditional love. The curse mark on her shoulder had stopped burning, but she could feel it there like a brand, pulsing with each heartbeat. Animals emerged from the forest to watch her pass. Wolves with golden eyes, ravens that cawed warnings, deer that stepped aside with what looked like reverence. They sensed what she was becoming, even if she didn't understand it herself. By midday, the cheerful farmlands of her childhood had given way to something altogether more sinister. The trees here grew too tall and too close together, their branches forming a canopy so thick that noon looked like twilight. The air tasted of copper and old magic, and every instinct Lyralei possessed screamed at her to turn back. But she couldn't. The curse wouldn't let her. "You're far from home, little lamb." The voice came from above, smooth as silk and twice as dangerous. Lyralei looked up to see a man perched impossibly on a branch 20 feet overhead. He dropped to the ground with feline grace, landing in a crouch that showcased muscles built for violence. His hair was silver white despite his youthful face, and his eyes were the pale blue of winter ice. "I'm exactly where I need to be," Lyralei replied, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. The stranger circled her slowly, nostrils flaring as he scented the air. "Interesting. You smell like fear and power in equal measure. And that mark on your shoulder, even through your shirt, I can sense its energy." His smile revealed teeth just a little too sharp. "You're her, aren't you? The cursed one we've all been waiting for." Waiting for? Word travels fast in the Shadow territories. A girl with the Moonshard Curse, born to either save or damn us all. "Though I have to say, you're smaller than I expected." He stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she could see the predator lurking behind his human facade. "I'm Kale Ironmaw, beta of the Crimson Fang Pack, And you, little curse-bearer, are trespassing. The name sent a chill through her. She'd heard stories of the Crimson Fang Pack, wolves so vicious they made other predators seem tame. I'm traveling to see Alpha King Theron Nightwhisper, she said, lifting her chin. By right of prophecy. Kale threw back his head and laughed, a sound like breaking glass. The prophecy? Oh, this is rich. You actually believe that old legend? It's not a legend if I'm standing here with the mark burning on my shoulder. Fair point. His expression sobered. But here's the thing about prophecies, little lamb. They never specify whether the prophesied one will survive long enough to fulfill them. The threat hung in the air between them, and Lyralei felt something wild and dangerous unfurling in her chest. The trees around them began to sway despite the absence of wind, and she could hear the whispers of every living thing within a mile radius. You're afraid of me, she said quietly, and it wasn't a question. Kale's smile faltered. I'm afraid of what you represent. Change. The end of the old ways. Maybe the old ways need to end. Careful, curse-bearer. Words like that have started wars. But as he spoke, Lyralei could sense his emotions as clearly as if he'd spoken them aloud. Fear, yes, but also curiosity. And beneath that, something that felt almost like hope. Take me to your Alpha, she said. I don't think so. Our Alpha has standing orders regarding trespassers. Then take me to Alpha King Theron. Kale's laugh this time held no humor. The Nightwhisper King doesn't grant audiences to wandering strays. He rules from the Obsidian Fortress, and no one enters those gates without invitation. Then how am I supposed to fulfill this prophecy everyone seems to know about? That's your problem, not mine. But even as he spoke, Lyralei could sense his internal conflict. He wanted to help her, though he'd die before admitting it. You could escort me, she suggested. Ensure I don't cause trouble in your territory. I could kill you here and save everyone the trouble. The words should have terrified her, but instead, Lyralei felt a strange calm descend. You could try. The air between them crackled with tension. Kale's eyes began to glow with an inner light, and she could see his human form wavering at the edges, ready to shift into something altogether more dangerous. But then a new voice cut through the forest, deep and commanding and utterly without fear. Stand down, Kale. Both Lyralei and Kale spun toward the sound. From the shadows between the trees stepped a man who could only be an alpha. He was massive, easily 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders that could bear the weight of the world. His hair was dark as midnight, his skin bronzed from years under the sun, and his eyes, gods, his eyes were like molten gold, ancient and knowing, and completely without mercy. But it wasn't Alpha King Theron Nightwhisper. This man's power felt different, wilder, like a storm barely contained within human skin. Alpha Darius Stormclaw, Kale said, dropping to one knee immediately. I found her on the southern border. She claims to be traveling to the Obsidian Fortress. Alpha Darius Stormclaw studied Lyralei with those impossible golden eyes, and she felt exposed, as if he could see straight through to her soul. The curse-bearer, he said finally. I can smell the magic on you. Ancient and dangerous. Are you going to try to stop me too? Lyralei asked, proud that her voice didn't shake. A smile played at the corner of his mouth. Stop you? Child, I've been waiting 18 years for you to arrive. He gestured toward the deeper forest. Come. My pack will escort you to the Obsidian Fortress. Though I should warn you, Theron Nightwhisper is not known for his hospitality. Kate, why are you helping me? Because, Darius said, already turning to lead the way. The prophecy doesn't just speak of your role in our future. It speaks of mine as well. And unlike my cautious beta here, I'm curious to see how this story ends. As they walked deeper into the shadow territories, Lyralei couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking toward either her salvation or her doom. The curse mark on her shoulder had begun to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat, and with each step closer to the Obsidian Fortress, she could feel something awakening inside her that was far more dangerous than any wolf. Behind them, Kale followed in brooding silence, his conflicted emotions a constant whisper in the back of her mind. Ahead of them, Alpha Darius moved with the confidence of a man who feared nothing, not even prophecies that might destroy the world. And somewhere beyond the dark horizon, Alpha King Theron Nightwhisper waited in his fortress of black stone, unaware that his destiny was walking toward him on bare feet and shaking legs, carrying enough power to reshape their world forever. The obsidian fortress rose from the mountainside like a dark jewel, its black walls seeming to absorb the late afternoon light rather than reflect it. Lyralei had never seen anything so beautiful or so terrifying. Spires twisted toward the sky like frozen screams, and the gates, massive things carved with symbols that hurt to look at directly, stood closed against the world. Second thoughts? Alpha Darius asked, noticing how she'd stopped walking. Too late for those, Lyralei replied, though her hands trembled as she spoke. The curse mark on her shoulder had been growing more painful with each mile they'd traveled, and now it felt like liquid fire spreading through her veins. Kale moved up beside them, his expression grim. The sentries have been watching us for the past hour. They know we're here. As if summoned by his words, figures appeared on the fortress walls. Even from a distance, Lyralei could see they weren't entirely human. Their movements were too fluid, too predatory. These were wolves who'd learned to wear human skin as a disguise, but hadn't quite mastered the art of hiding their true nature. "State your business," came a voice from the gates, amplified by some kind of magic that made it echo off the mountain walls. Alpha Darius stepped forward. "Darius Stormclaw, Alpha of the Northern Reach Pack, requests audience with King Theron. I bring the curse bearer, as foretold." Silence stretched for long moments. Then, with a grinding sound like the earth itself splitting open, the gates began to move. "The king will see the girl," the voice announced. "Alone." "Absolutely not," Darius growled, his protective instincts flaring. "She goes in under my protection or not at all." "Then not at all," came the cool reply. Lyralei placed a hand on Darius's arm, surprised by the corded muscle she found there. Through her touch, she could sense his emotions, genuine concern for her safety, frustrated protectiveness, and beneath it all, a bone-deep fear of what might happen if she entered that fortress alone. "I have to do this," she said quietly. "You don't know what he's capable of," Darius argued. "The stories about Theron Nightwhisper, they're not just stories, Lyralei. He's killed alphas with his bare hands. He's destroyed entire bloodlines for the crime of opposing him. And according to the prophecy, he's also the only one who can break my curse." Kale snorted. "If the prophecy is even real, for all we know, this is an elaborate trap to lure the most dangerous cursed bloodline directly into his hands." But Lyralei was already walking toward the gates. With each step, the pain in her shoulder intensified, and she could feel something vast and terrible stirring in the depths of her soul. Whatever power the curse had locked away inside her, it was beginning to wake up. The gates closed behind her with a sound like thunder, cutting her off from Darius and Kale and any hope of retreat. The courtyard she found herself in was beautiful in a stark, deadly way. Black stone, polished to mirror brightness, fountains that ran with water so clear it looked like liquid crystal, and gardens full of plants she'd never seen before, their leaves silver and their flowers the deep red of fresh blood. "Welcome to the Obsidian Fortress." Lyralei spun toward the voice and found herself face to face with a woman who could only be described as ethereal. Tall and willowy, with platinum hair that fell to her waist and eyes like chips of amethyst, she moved with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to power. "I'm Vera Moonwhisper, the king's advisor," the woman continued, her voice carrying just a hint of an accent Lyralei couldn't place. "His Majesty is preparing to receive you." "Preparing how?" Vera's smile was sharp as a blade. "The curse you carry isn't just dangerous to you, child. It's dangerous to everyone around you, especially to those of us with significant magical ability." She gestured toward a doorway that seemed to be carved from a single piece of black stone. "There are," precautions that must be taken. As they walked through corridors that seemed to stretch on forever, Lyralei became aware of the subtle wrongness that permeated the fortress. The shadows moved independently of their sources. Whispers echoed from empty rooms, and every surface reflected her image just slightly incorrectly, as if the mirrors were showing her possible futures rather than her present self. "The king has been waiting for you for a very long time," Vera said as they climbed a spiraling staircase that seemed to ascend into darkness. "Though I confess, we expected someone more impressive. Sorry to disappoint." "Oh, you haven't disappointed anyone yet. But the night is young." They emerged into a circular chamber at the top of one of the twisted spires. The walls were covered in tapestries that depicted scenes of battle and triumph, but the threads seemed to shift and change when Lyralei wasn't looking directly at them. Candles floated in the air without holders, their flames an unnatural blue-white that cast dancing shadows in every direction. And there, standing with his back to them at a window that looked out over the shadow territories, was a figure that could only be Alpha King Theron Nightwhisper. Even from behind, his presence was overwhelming. Broad shoulders strained against a shirt that looked like it was woven from midnight itself, and his dark hair fell in waves to brush his collar. When he turned to face them, Lyralei's breath caught in her throat. He was beautiful in the way that storms were beautiful, magnificent and terrible, and utterly beyond human control. His face could have been carved by ancient masters, all sharp angles and cruel perfection, but it was his eyes that held her transfixed. They were silver, like moonlight on water, and they seemed to see straight through to her soul. "So," he said, his voice a rumble that seemed to resonate in her bones, "you're the one who's going to save us all." It wasn't a question, and the mockery in his tone was unmistakable. "I'm the one who's cursed," Lyralei replied, meeting his gaze despite every instinct that screamed at her to look away. Whether that saves anyone remains to be seen. Theron moved closer, and she could feel the power radiating from him like heat from a forge. "Show me the mark." "I'm sorry?" "The curse mark. Show it to me." Lyralei hesitated, acutely aware that she was alone in a tower with the most dangerous man in the territories. But the prophecy had brought her this far, and she had to trust it would carry her through. She turned and pulled aside the neck of her shirt, exposing the crescent moon wrapped in thorns that burned like silver fire on her shoulder blade. Theron's sharp intake of breath was audible in the silence. "Vera," he said quietly, not taking his eyes off the mark, "leave us." "My lord, I don't think—" "Now." The advisor disappeared without another word, and suddenly, Lyralei was alone with the Alpha King who was supposed to either save her or destroy her. The weight of his attention was like a physical thing, pressing down on her until she could barely breathe. "Do you know what that mark means?" he asked finally. "That I'm cursed." "That mark," he said, moving close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin, "is the seal of the moon goddess herself. It marks you as her chosen vessel, the one prophesied to either unite the packs under a single rule or burn them all to ash." Lyralei turned to face him, and found herself trapped between his body and the cold stone wall. "And which do you think I'll do?" His smile was sharp enough to cut. "That depends entirely on whether you can survive what comes next." The chamber Theron led her to defied every law of architecture Lyralei thought she knew. It was impossibly vast, its ceiling lost in shadows that seemed to writhe and pulse with their own dark life. The floor was made of the same black stone as the rest of the fortress, but here it was inscribed with symbols that glowed with silver fire, forming intricate patterns that hurt her eyes when she tried to follow them. "This is the heart chamber," Theron explained, his voice echoing strangely in the vast space. "It's where the fortress draws its power, and where we'll determine exactly what kind of curse you're carrying." "What do you mean, what kind?" Lyralei asked, though she suspected she didn't want to know the answer. "The Moonshard Curse has 3 possible manifestations," he said, moving to stand in the center of the glowing symbols. "The first grants the bearer power over the natural world, plants, animals, the elements themselves. The second allows them to sense and manipulate emotions, to bend others to their will through the sheer force of their presence. And the third? His silver eyes fixed on hers, and she saw something that might have been pity flash through them. The third turns the bearer into a weapon of pure destruction. Every living thing they touch dies. Every emotion they feel becomes a physical force capable of leveling cities. Those who manifest the third aspect of the curse don't live long. Either they destroy themselves, or someone destroys them first. Lyralei's mouth went dry. How do you know which one I am? We test you. He gestured to the symbols on the floor. Step into the center circle. Every survival instinct she possessed screamed at her to refuse. But she could feel the curse mark on her shoulder pulsing in rhythm with the glowing symbols. Whatever power was locked inside her, it wanted to be free. She stepped into the circle. The moment her feet crossed the boundary, the world exploded into sensation. Power rushed through her like a river breaking through a dam, and she could suddenly sense every living thing within miles. The wolves guarding the fortress, their emotions a complex tapestry of loyalty and fear. The trees clinging to the mountainside, their ancient patience and slow wisdom, even the smallest insects. Their simple drives and basic needs. But it wasn't just sensing them. She could feel her own emotions reaching out like invisible hands, touching their minds, influencing their thoughts. The realization terrified her. Second manifestation, Theron said, and there was something like relief in his voice. You're an empath with the power to influence emotions. Dangerous, but not apocalyptic. I can feel everything, Lyralei gasped, overwhelmed by the flood of sensations. Every creature for miles around. Their fear, their hunger, their broke off as a wave of predatory satisfaction washed over her, and she realized it was coming from Theron himself. You're enjoying this, she accused, turning to face him. His smile was sharp as winter. I'm enjoying the confirmation that you're not going to accidentally destroy my kingdom the moment you lose control of your temper. Is that what you thought would happen? It's what I hoped wouldn't happen. He moved closer, and she could feel his emotions now. A complex mixture of relief, curiosity, and something darker that made her pulse quicken. The question now is whether you can learn to control it. Control it how? The same way you control any other muscle. Practice, discipline, and pain. His smile turned predatory. Lots of pain. Before she could ask what he meant, Theron raised his hand and spoke a word in a language that seemed to bypass her ears and resonate directly in her bones. The symbols on the floor flared brighter, and suddenly the gentle flow of power through her body became a raging torrent. Lyralei screamed as every nerve ending in her body caught fire. The emotions of every living thing within miles crashed into her mind at once. Fear, hunger, rage, desire, desperation. Until she couldn't tell which feelings were hers, and which belonged to the countless creatures whose minds she was accidentally invading. Stop! She gasped, falling to her knees on the burning stone. Please, stop. Learn to control it, Theron said coldly, his voice cutting through the chaos in her head. Or it will control you. Through the pain, Lyralei could sense his emotions clearly now. He wasn't enjoying her suffering. Beneath his cold exterior, she could feel genuine concern, even protectiveness, but there was something else there too. Something that felt like recognition. You're like me, she whispered, the realization cutting through the agony. You have power you can barely control. For just a moment, his perfect mask slipped, and she saw something raw and vulnerable flash across his features. I have power that could destroy this entire mountain range if I'm not careful, he admitted quietly. Just like you do. Then help me, she pleaded, struggling to her feet despite the fire in her veins. Don't leave me to figure this out alone. Theron stared at her for a long moment, and she could feel his internal struggle as clearly as if it were her own. Finally, he spoke another word, and the symbols on the floor dimmed to a gentle glow. The overwhelming flood of emotions receded to a manageable trickle, and Lyralei sagged with relief. The first lesson, he said, his voice gentler now, is that power without control is just destruction waiting to happen. The second lesson is that control without understanding is just fear dressed up as discipline. And the third lesson? The third lesson, he said, moving close enough that she could see flecks of gold in his silver eyes, is that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is trust someone else with your power. Are you saying I shouldn't trust you? I'm saying you shouldn't trust anyone. Not until you know whether they want to use your power or help you master it. His gaze intensified. The question is, which do you think I want to do? Lyralei studied his face, using her newfound ability to sense the emotions beneath his carefully controlled exterior. What she found there surprised her. Genuine desire to help her, mixed with a bone-deep loneliness that matched her own. And beneath it all, something that felt dangerously like hope. I think, she said slowly, you want to help me because you know what it's like to be alone with power that could destroy everything you touch. His sharp intake of breath told her she'd hit the mark. You're more perceptive than I expected. It's not perception. It's the curse. I can feel what you're feeling. Then you know this is just the beginning, he said grimly. What you experienced here was nothing compared to what you'll face once word spreads that the cursed one has awakened. There are wolves out there who will want to use your power for their own ends, and others who will want to destroy you before you can use it on them. What are you saying? I'm saying that if you want to survive long enough to fulfill whatever destiny the prophecy has in store for you, you're going to need protection, training, and allies who understand what you're going through. Lyralei met his gaze steadily. Are you offering to be one of those allies? I'm offering to keep you alive long enough to learn to keep yourself alive. His smile was sharp but not unkind. The rest, you'll have to earn. As they left the heart chamber behind, Lyralei couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just taken the first step down a path that would change everything. Not just for her, but for every wolf in the territories. The curse mark on her shoulder had settled into a steady, warm pulse, and for the first time since she'd left Thornwick, she felt something that might have been hope. Behind them, the symbols on the chamber floor continued to glow with silver fire, as if they too recognized that something momentous had just begun. 3 days into her training, Lyralei discovered that Alpha King Theron Nightwhisper was a ruthless teacher. Each morning began before dawn in the heart chamber, where he pushed her abilities to their limits and beyond. Each afternoon was spent in physical combat training with his elite guards, who showed her no mercy despite her lack of experience. And each evening ended with her collapsing into an exhausted sleep, only to dream of silver eyes and the growing weight of a destiny she didn't understand. Again, Theron commanded from his position across the training circle. His shirt was gone, revealing a torso marked with scars that told the story of a life spent in battle, and sweat gleamed on his skin despite the cool morning air. Lyralei wiped blood from her split lip and struggled to her feet. They'd been sparring for 2 hours, and he'd knocked her down at least 20 times. Her body ached, her head pounded, and she was fairly certain she had at least 3 new bruises forming on her ribs. I can barely stand, she protested. Your enemies won't care about your fatigue, he replied coldly. They'll use it against you. Now, again, she lunged at him, trying to use her speed to compensate for her lack of strength, but he caught her wrist effortlessly and used her own momentum to send her sprawling across the stone floor. Again, you're holding back, he observed, not even breathing hard. I'm trying not to accidentally influence your emotions while we fight, Lyralei snapped, pushing herself upright once more. Forgive me for not wanting to cheat. Cheat? His laugh was sharp. Your ability to sense and influence emotions isn't cheating. It's your greatest weapon. Use it. I won't manipulate you. Why not? I'm your enemy in this scenario, because you're trying to help me, and I won't repay that by what? By using every tool at your disposal to survive? He moved closer, his silver eyes blazing with something that might have been anger. Do you think your real enemies will have such scruples? Do you think they'll hesitate to use every dirty trick they know to destroy you? That doesn't mean I should. It means you should be prepared for anything. Without warning, he grabbed her shoulders and pulled her against him, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. Feel what I'm feeling right now. Tell me what you sense. The contact sent her newly awakened abilities into overdrive. Through her palms pressed against his chest, she could feel the complex tangle of his emotions. Frustration at her reluctance to use her power, protectiveness that surprised her with its intensity, and beneath it all, something deeper that made her breath catch. "You're angry," she whispered. "What else?" She closed her eyes, letting her senses expand. "Worried. You're worried about something. What am I worried about? Me." The realization hit her like a physical blow. "You're worried about me. Why?" She could feel it now. The undercurrent of fear that ran through all his other emotions. "Because you think I'm not going to be strong enough. You think when the real test comes, I'll break." His hands tightened on her shoulders. "And what do you think?" Lyralei opened her eyes and found herself drowning in his silver gaze. "I think you're probably right. Then prove me wrong." This time when she moved, it wasn't with physical force alone. She let her power flow out through her touch, sensing the complex web of his thoughts and emotions, finding the places where his concentration wavered. She didn't manipulate, she didn't try to control him, but she used what she sensed to anticipate his movements, to strike where his guard was weakest. For the first time in 3 days, she managed to land a solid hit. Theron staggered backward, genuine surprise flickering across his features as he touched the spot on his jaw where her fist had connected. "Better. I barely touched you. You used your gift without trying to control me. That's progress." He straightened, rolling his shoulders to loosen the tension. "But it's not enough. Not yet." "What do you mean?" Instead of answering, he walked to the edge of the training circle and nodded to someone Lyralei couldn't see. A moment later, the chamber doors opened, and 3 figures entered that made her blood run cold. They were wolves, but not like any she'd ever encountered. Their human forms were too tall, too angular, with eyes that reflected light like an animal's and teeth filed to points. They moved with a fluid grace that spoke of barely contained violence, and when they smiled, it looked more like a snarl. "Rogue wolves," Theron explained, his voice matter-of-fact. "Exiled from their packs for crimes too heinous to forgive. They've agreed to help with your training in exchange for consideration." "What kind of consideration?" "The kind that involves them getting to leave here alive if they don't kill you." Lyralei's mouth went dry. "You're joking." "I never joke about training." He moved to stand beside the rogues, and the contrast was striking. Where they radiated chaotic violence, he was controlled power personified. "These 3 have been hired by my enemies before. They know every dirty trick, every underhanded tactic that might be used against you. If you can survive them, you can survive anything. And if I can't, then the prophecy was wrong about you." His smile was sharp as winter. "But I don't think it was." The largest of the rogues, a man with scars covering half his face, stepped forward. "The little curse bearer," he sneered. "I was expecting someone more impressive." "Careful, Vex," Theron warned quietly. "She's more dangerous than she looks." "Is she now?" The scarred rogue's grin widened. "We'll see about that." What followed was unlike any fight Lyralei had ever experienced. These weren't controlled sparring matches with rules and boundaries. These were 3 predators trying to kill her while she tried desperately to stay alive. They came at her from all sides, using claws and fangs and brute strength to drive her back against the chamber walls. Her earlier training with Theron had been gentle by comparison. This was raw, visceral combat where a single mistake would mean death. But something had awakened in her during those 3 days of brutal training. When the scarred rogue lunged for her throat, she didn't just dodge. She reached out with her power and amplified his own bloodlust until it consumed his rational thought. He crashed into the wall behind her, too maddened by artificial rage to control his movements. The second rogue tried to flank her, but she sensed his approach through the predatory satisfaction radiating from his mind. She spun and caught him with an elbow to the solar plexus that sent him gasping to his knees. The third, A woman with silver hair and yellow eyes was more cautious. She circled Lyralei like a shark, looking for an opening, and when she attacked, it was with deadly precision. But Lyralei was learning. Instead of fighting the rogue's skill with brute force, she reached into the woman's mind and found her deepest fear, the terror of being alone, abandoned by her pack, left to die in the wilderness. She didn't have to amplify it. Just touching that fear was enough to make the woman hesitate. That moment of hesitation was all Lyralei needed. She struck with everything she had, physical force and emotional manipulation combined, and the rogue collapsed. When it was over, all three rogues lay unconscious on the chamber floor, and Lyralei stood in the center of the circle, breathing hard and covered in their blood and her own. "Impressive," Theron said quietly. "Though you nearly killed them, I was trying not to die myself," she replied, wiping blood from a cut above her eyebrow. "And you succeeded. But more importantly, you did it without losing yourself to the power. You used your abilities as tools, not crutches." He approached her slowly, as if she were a wild animal that might bolt. "How do you feel?" Lyralei considered the question. Her body ached, her clothes were torn, and she was fairly certain she'd never be able to look at raw meat the same way again. But beneath the pain and exhaustion, she felt something else, a sense of completion, as if some missing piece of herself had finally clicked into place. "Dangerous," she said finally. "I feel dangerous." Theron's smile was sharp and proud. "Good. Because tomorrow, we start the real training." 2 weeks after her first real combat trial, Lyralei discovered that living in the Obsidian Fortress was like existing inside a beautiful, deadly puzzle. Every corridor held secrets. Every room had hidden purposes. And every person she encountered seemed to be weighing whether she was an asset or a threat. But it was the nights that had begun to unravel her carefully constructed emotional defenses. After each day of brutal training, after her body had been pushed beyond its limits and her power tested in ways that left her trembling with exhaustion, Theron would find her, sometimes in the fortress library, where she'd taken to reading ancient texts about curse magic by candlelight, sometimes in the gardens, where she'd sit among the silver-leafed plants and try to make sense of the emotional chaos that constantly threatened to overwhelm her. Tonight, he found her on the highest balcony of his tower, where the mountain wind whipped through her hair and the stars spread out like diamonds against black velvet. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, settling beside her on the stone ledge. "I don't think I'll ever sleep normally again," Lyralei replied, not taking her eyes off the horizon. "Do you know what it's like to feel every nightmare within a mile radius? Every dream, every moment of fear or desire or pain?" "Actually, I do." Something in his voice made her turn to look at him. In the moonlight, his perfect features looked almost vulnerable, and she realized this might be the first time she'd seen him when he wasn't wearing his mask of cold control. "Your power," she said, understanding flooding through her. "It affects you the same way." "Not exactly the same. Your curse makes you feel what others feel. Mine makes others feel what I feel." He was quiet for a moment, his silver eyes distant. "Do you know why this fortress is so isolated? Why I rule from a mountain peak instead of from the heart of civilization? Because you're dangerous. Because when I was your age, I killed 300 people in a single night. Not with claws or fangs or weapons, with emotion." His voice was barely above a whisper. "I had a nightmare, and in my sleep, I projected that terror outward. Everyone within 5 miles experienced the same horror I was dreaming, and their hearts simply stopped." Lyralei stared at him in shock. "That's why you understand. That's why you're the only one who can train me. That's why I'm the only one foolish enough to try." He turned to meet her gaze, and she could see the weight of decades in his eyes. "Do you know what the worst part is? Not the guilt, though that's always there. Not the fear in everyone's eyes when they look at me, though that never gets easier. It's the loneliness, the isolation, the knowledge that you can never let your guard down completely, because the moment you do, You might destroy everything you care about." He reached out as if to touch her hand, then stopped himself. "That's what awaits you, Lyralei. That's what it means to carry a curse like ours. Unless I learn to control it. Control is an illusion. What you can learn is discipline, awareness, how to channel the power instead of letting it run wild through you." His smile was sad. "But control, true control, that's something neither of us will ever have." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, two people who understood what it meant to carry power that could destroy the world. Finally, Lyralei spoke. "Show me," she said quietly. "Show you what?" "What you just told me about. Let me feel what you feel, so I understand what I'm becoming." Theron went very still. "That's not a good idea." "Why not? I can handle it." "No, you can't." His voice carried absolute certainty. "What I feel, what I've felt every day for the past 15 years, would break your mind in minutes. Try me." "Lyralei, I'm tired of being protected from the truth," she said fiercely. "I'm tired of people deciding what I can and can't handle. If this is my future, if this is what I'm going to become, then I want to understand it completely." Theron stared at her for a long moment, and she could see the internal struggle playing out across his features. Finally, he sighed. 5 seconds, he said. "That's all. And if you tell me to stop, I stop immediately." "Agreed. Give me your hand." Lyralei placed her palm in his, and the moment their skin touched, his emotional barriers dropped completely. The loneliness hit her first, not just solitude, but the crushing knowledge that he could never be truly close to another person without risking their destruction. It was followed by guilt so profound it felt like drowning. The weight of every life his power had claimed, every person who had died because he'd lost control for just a moment. Then came the fear, not of death or pain, but of himself, of what he might do if he ever stopped fighting to contain the darkness inside him. But beneath it all, threading through the pain and isolation like a silver ribbon, was something else entirely. Hope, fragile, desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, he wouldn't have to face this burden alone anymore. "Stop!" she gasped, and immediately the connection was severed. Theron pulled his hand back as if it had been burned. "I told you that you care about me," she interrupted, her voice shaky but determined. "That's what you're most afraid of. Not that you'll lose control and hurt someone, that you'll lose control and hurt me." His sharp intake of breath was answer enough. "Theron," she said softly, using his name for the first time since they'd met. "I'm not going anywhere. You don't understand what you're saying. I understand that you've spent 15 years thinking you were a monster, when really you're just a man trying to carry a burden that's too heavy for anyone to bear alone." She leaned closer, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his silver eyes. "I understand that for the first time in your life, you've found someone who might be able to help you carry it. And what if I hurt you? What if you don't?" For a moment, she thought he might actually reach for her again. But then, his walls snapped back into place, and he was once again the cold, controlled alpha king she'd first met. "Your training resumes at dawn," he said, standing abruptly. "Get some sleep." But as he turned to go, Lyralei caught his wrist. Through that brief contact, she felt his carefully controlled facade crack just enough to let her glimpse the man beneath, the one who was just as afraid and just as lonely as she was. "This doesn't have to be forever," she said quietly. "The isolation, the fear, we could figure it out together." "Lyralei, think about it," she said, releasing him. "That's all I'm asking." He left without another word, but she could feel his emotional turmoil long after he'd disappeared into the fortress. For the first time since she'd arrived, she felt like she understood not just her own curse, but his as well. And for the first time since she'd learned what she was, she didn't feel completely alone. The letter arrived on a morning when the mountain mist clung to the fortress walls like grasping fingers. Lyralei was in the library, reading about ancient bloodline curses, when Theron Nightwhisper appeared in the doorway with an expression that could have frozen fire. "His Majesty requires your presence in his study," Vera announced, her voice carrying an edge Lyralei had learned to recognize as barely controlled worry. Immediately, Lyralei found Theron standing behind his massive desk, a piece of parchment crumpled in his fist. His jaw was clenched, his silver eyes blazing with rage, and the air around him seemed to shimmer with barely contained power. "What's wrong?" she asked. Instead of answering, he smoothed out the letter and slid it across the desk toward her. The writing was elegant, but the words made her blood run cold. "Your Majesty, word has reached us that you harbor the cursed one within your fortress. We write to inform you that the Council of Alphas has voted. The girl known as Lyralei must be surrendered for judgment within 7 days, or we will consider her presence an act of war against the established order. The prophecy speaks of either salvation or destruction. We choose to prevent both." Alpha Cassius Bloodmere, speaker for the council. "How did they find out?" Lyralei whispered. "Someone talked." Theron's voice was deadly quiet. "Someone in my own fortress betrayed your presence here." "What does this mean? What will they do to me?" The Council of Alphas represents the old guard, traditionalists who see change as a threat to their power. "If they get their hands on you..." He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. "They'll kill me. They'll try to strip your power first. There are ways to drain cursed magic from a bloodline, but they're rarely survived by the bearer." His knuckles were white where he gripped the edge of his desk. "I won't let that happen. You can't fight the entire council. They represent dozens of packs, thousands of wolves. Then we'll find another way." He moved around the desk to stand before her, his presence as overwhelming as ever. "But first, we need to accelerate your training. If they're coming in 7 days, you need to be ready." "Ready for what?" "To fight for your life." The next 3 days blurred together in a haze of desperate preparation. Theron pushed her harder than ever before, testing her abilities in scenarios that grew progressively more dangerous. She learned to project her emotions outward like weapons, to sense deception through the subtle shifts in others' feelings, to use her power to coordinate with allies and confuse enemies. But it was the nights that changed everything. Unable to sleep, Lyralei would find herself drawn to Theron's private chambers, where she discovered he spent his evenings reading reports and planning defenses against an enemy that outnumbered them 10-1. "You should rest," he said one night, looking up from a map covered in strategic markings. "So should you," she replied, settling into the chair across from his desk. "When did you last sleep?" "Sleep is a luxury I can't afford right now. Even kings need rest, Theron. Even cursed girls need protection." They stared at each other across the desk, and Lyralei could feel the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. Finally, she leaned forward. "Tell me about the nightmare," she said quietly. "The one that killed those people." His hands stilled on the map. "Why?" "Because I have nightmares too. Because sometimes I wake up and feel like I'm drowning in everyone else's emotions, and I think if I don't find a way to make it stop, I'm going to go insane." She paused, "Because I think talking about it might help us both." For a long moment, she thought he would refuse. Then, slowly, he set down his quill and leaned back in his chair. "I was 19, he began, his voice distant. "Just crowned Alpha King after my father's death. I thought I had my power under control, thought I'd learned to contain it." He was quiet for so long, she wondered if he would continue. "I dreamed I was being hunted. Something massive and terrible was chasing me through an endless forest. And no matter how fast I ran, I could hear it getting closer. I could feel its breath on my neck, its claws reaching for my heart." "What was hunting you?" "My own fear. My terror that I wasn't strong enough to rule, that I would fail everyone who depended on me, that I would become the monster everyone expected me to be." His smile was bitter. "The irony wasn't lost on me when I woke up and discovered I'd become exactly that." Lyralei reached across the desk and covered his hand with hers. The moment their skin touched, she felt the familiar rush of his emotions. But this time, she also felt something else, a sense of completion, as if some missing piece of herself had finally fallen into place. "You're not a monster," she said firmly. You're a man who's been carrying an impossible burden alone for too long, and you think you can help me carry it? I think we're stronger together than we are apart." Theron turned his hand palm up, threading their fingers together. "Show me," he said quietly. "Show you what? Your nightmare. Your fear. Let me feel what you feel, so I understand what you're going through." It was the same request she'd made of him days earlier, but now she understood the weight of it. Still, she didn't hesitate. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." Lyralei closed her eyes and let her barriers drop. She let him feel the crushing weight of everyone else's emotions, the way they pressed against her mind like a constant tide, threatening to drown her in their collective pain and joy and fear. She showed him what it was like to never be alone with her own thoughts, to feel like a vessel for the entire world's emotional chaos. But she also let him feel her hope, the growing certainty that together, they might find a way to master their curses instead of being mastered by them. When she opened her eyes, she found him staring at her with an expression she'd never seen before. Wonder, mixed with something deeper. "I've never met anyone who could understand," he said quietly. "Neither have I." They sat there in the lamplight, hands clasped, sharing the weight of their respective burdens in a way that made them both feel less alone than either had in years. "Lyralei," Theron said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "Yes? Whatever happens when the council arrives, I want you to know, meeting you, training you, watching you grow into your power. It's been the greatest privilege of my life. Don't talk like we're going to lose. I'm talking like a man who's finally found something worth fighting for, no matter the odds." Before she could respond, he lifted their joined hands and pressed his lips to her knuckles, a gesture so gentle and reverent it made her heart race. "3 more days," he said when he pulled away. 3 more days to prepare for whatever's coming. "And after that? After that, we face it together." For the first time since the letter had arrived, Lyralei felt something that might have been hope. Whatever the council brought to their gates, she and Theron would meet it side by side. And maybe, just maybe, they would both survive to see what came next. The council's army appeared on the horizon like a storm cloud, dark and threatening against the pale morning sky. From the highest tower of the obsidian fortress, Lyralei watched as hundreds of wolves in both human and shifted form spread across the valley below, their coordinated movements speaking of military precision and deadly intent. "Impressive," Theron said quietly, joining her at the window. His armor gleamed like liquid shadow, and the sword at his hip hummed with contained power. "Cassius certainly didn't come to negotiate." "How many?" Lyralei asked, though she suspected she didn't want to know the answer. 800, maybe more. Representatives from every major pack in the territories. His smile was sharp as winter. "They're taking no chances with you. Thanks for watching." "With us," she corrected, and felt his surprise through their growing emotional connection. "Lyralei, don't." She turned to face him, noting how his perfect features seemed carved from marble in the morning light. "Don't you dare suggest I run or hide while you face them alone. We're in this together. You don't understand what they'll do to you if... I understand that 6 weeks ago, I was a broken girl who believed she was worthless. Now I'm someone who can stand beside the most powerful alpha in the territories as an equal." She reached for his hand, feeling the familiar spark when their skin touched. "That transformation happened because you saw something in me that no one else did. Don't insult that gift by asking me to abandon you now." Theron stared at her for a long moment, and she could feel the war raging within him, his protective instincts battling against his growing respect for her strength. "If we do this," he said finally, "if we face them together, there's no going back. Win or lose, everything changes after today." "I know. And you're certain? No doubts? No regrets?" In answer, Lyralei rose up on her toes and kissed him. It was meant to be a simple gesture of reassurance, but the moment their lips touched, something electric passed between them. She could feel his carefully controlled emotions breaking free. Desire, protectiveness, and something deeper that made her pulse quicken. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. "No regrets," she whispered against his lips. A commotion in the courtyard below drew their attention. The massive gates of the fortress were opening, and a small party emerged under a flag of parley. At their head rode a man who could only be Alpha Cassius Bloodmere, tall and imposing, with iron-gray hair and eyes like chips of flint. "He's here to offer terms," Theron observed, though his tone suggested he placed little value on whatever those terms might be. "What kind of terms?" "The kind where I surrender you in exchange for them not reducing my fortress to rubble." "And if you refuse?" "Then we find out how well 800 years of defensive preparations hold up against 800 very angry wolves." They made their way down to the fortress's main hall, where Theron's own advisors and guards were already assembled. Vera Moonwhisper stood near the throne, her usual serene expression replaced by barely controlled tension. Kael Ironmaw was there too, along with Alpha Darius and several other pack leaders who had sworn allegiance to Theron over the years. "Your Majesty," Vera said as they approached, "Alpha Cassius waits in the courtyard. He's brought a sizable escort." "I'm sure he has. How many of his honor guard made it inside my walls?" 20. All armed, all radiating enough hostility to make the stones themselves nervous. Theron nodded grimly. "And our people?" "Positioned as discussed. If this goes badly, we'll be ready. See that you are." He turned to Lyralei, his silver eyes intense. "Last chance to change your mind. I could have you taken to the deepest vaults of the fortress, hidden away until this is over, and spend the rest of my life wondering what happened? Wondering if you died because I was too cowardly to stand beside you?" She shook her head firmly. "We face this together, or not at all." The great doors opened with a sound like thunder, and Alpha Cassius Bloodmere strode into the hall as if he owned it. He was followed by his escort, 20 wolves who looked like they'd been carved from stone and trained for war from birth. Their eyes swept the chamber, cataloging threats and defensive positions with professional efficiency. "Theron," Cassius said, his voice carrying easily through the vast space. "You look well." "Cassius, I'd say the same, but you look like a man who's come to start a war." "I've come to prevent one. Surrender the cursed girl, and this ends peacefully." "And if I refuse?" Cassius smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Then we take her by force, and your fortress becomes a tomb." "Those are interesting terms," Theron replied, moving to stand directly in front of his throne rather than sitting in it. The gesture was subtle but significant. He was presenting himself as a warrior, not a king hiding behind symbols of authority. "But I'm afraid I'll have to decline." "Because you think you can win?" Cassius laughed, a sound like breaking glass. 800 against your what? 50? Those are poor odds, even for the legendary Theron Nightwhisper. "You're right. Those are terrible odds." Theron's smile was sharp as winter. "For you." "Meaning?" "Meaning you've made a fundamental error in your calculations." Theron gestured toward Lyralei, who stepped forward to stand beside him. "You've assumed I'd be fighting alone." Cassius's eyes fixed on her for the first time, and Lyralei felt the full weight of his attention like a physical blow. This was a man accustomed to being feared, to having others submit to his will through force of presence alone. But 6 weeks of training with Theron had taught her how to stand in the presence of power without flinching. "The cursed one," Cassius said, his voice carrying a mixture of fascination and disgust. "I expected someone more impressive." "Careful, Cassius," Theron warned quietly. "Appearances can be deceiving." "Can they? Well then, let's see what the girl is truly capable of." Without warning, Cassius raised his hand, and power lanced out toward Lyralei. Not physical force, but pure emotional assault designed to break her will and send her to her knees in submission. But instead of crumbling under the attack, Lyralei reached out with her own abilities and caught his power in an embrace of pure understanding. She felt his emotions in their rawest form: arrogance, fear of change, desperate need to maintain control over a world that was shifting beneath his feet. And instead of fighting those emotions, she accepted them, transformed them, and sent them back to him amplified 100-fold. Cassius staggered, his eyes widening in shock as his own arrogance crashed into him like a physical wall. For just a moment, his perfect control shattered, and everyone in the hall could see the frightened old man beneath the Alpha's mask. "Impressive indeed," he managed, straightening his shoulders with visible effort. "But party tricks won't save you when my army comes through those gates. Won't they?" Lyralei stepped forward, her voice carrying a new note of power that made several of Cassius's guards shift nervously. "Tell me, Alpha Cassius, how unified is your coalition? How certain are you that every one of those 800 wolves outside shares your vision of the future? They follow my lead, do they? Or do they follow because they fear what happens if they don't?" She could feel the doubt radiating from several of his escort, the cracks in their absolute loyalty. What if they had a choice? What if they could see a different path forward? "You're talking about treason. I'm talking about freedom. The freedom to choose their own destiny instead of having it dictated by a council of old men who fear change more than death itself." "Enough," Cassius's voice cracked like a whip. "You have until sunset to surrender yourself, or we will take you by force. And when we do, there won't be enough left of this fortress to serve as a monument to your foolishness." He turned on his heel and strode from the hall, his escort following in perfect formation. But Lyralei could feel their uncertainty now, the seeds of doubt her words had planted in their minds. "That went well," Vera observed dryly once the great doors had closed behind them. "Better than expected," Theron agreed, though his expression remained grim. "You planted doubt in their ranks. That will help when the fighting starts. Will it be enough? We'll find out at sunset." He turned to face his assembled allies. "You heard the terms. Anyone who wishes to leave before this begins has my permission to go. I won't hold it against you." Not a single person moved. "Then we make our stand here," Theron continued. "For the right to choose our own destiny, for the future of our people, and for the woman who has shown us all that curses can become blessings when wielded by the right hands." As his people dispersed to make their final preparations, Lyralei remained by his side. "Any regrets?" she asked quietly. Theron's smile was soft and real. "Only that we didn't have more time." "Who says we won't?" She took his hand in hers, feeling the familiar spark of connection. "This story isn't over yet, Theron. We're going to win." "How can you be so certain?" "Because," she said, standing on her toes to kiss him once more, "I can feel the future changing. And for the first time in my life, it feels like it's changing for the better." The sun hung low in the sky, painting the fortress walls blood red as Cassius's ultimatum reached its end. From the battlements, Lyralei could see the council's army spreading across the valley like a dark tide, their formation shifting from a display of force to an assault preparation. "They're moving into position," Cale reported, his enhanced vision tracking movements in the growing twilight. "Siege engines on the eastern approach, cavalry units flanking north and south. They mean to surround us completely." "Let them," Theron replied, his armor gleaming like liquid shadow in the dying light. "The more spread out they are, the harder it will be for them to coordinate when chaos begins." Lyralei closed her eyes and extended her newfound senses, feeling for the emotional currents flowing through the massive army below. What she found made her heart race with possibility. "They're not as unified as Cassius believes," she said, opening her eyes to meet Theron's gaze. "I can sense 3 distinct factions down there. The true believers who follow Cassius completely, those who came out of duty but have doubts, and a significant group that's only here because they're afraid of being seen as traitors to the old ways." "Can you influence them?" "The doubters, yes. The fearful ones, maybe. But it would require me to project my power across the entire valley, and I'm not sure." "You're not sure you're strong enough?" Lyralei hesitated. The scale of what he was suggesting was beyond anything she'd attempted before. To touch the minds of hundreds of wolves simultaneously, to plant seeds of doubt and hope across such a vast area, it would require her to lower every barrier she'd built, to open herself completely to the emotional chaos of an army. I'm not sure I'd survive it, she admitted quietly. Theron's hand found hers, warm and steady. You won't be doing it alone. What do you mean? My power amplifies emotion, remember? If we link our abilities, use them together. He squeezed her fingers gently. We might be able to reach every mind in that army. That's incredibly dangerous. If we lose control, if the feedback becomes too much, then we face that together too. His silver eyes held hers steadily. Do you trust me? With my life. Then let's change the world. Below them, torches flared to life throughout the council's camp as full darkness fell. The sound of marching feet echoed off the mountain walls as Cassius's forces moved into their final positions. Soon, very soon, the battle would begin. But high atop the obsidian fortress, two cursed souls joined hands and prepared to rewrite the rules of war itself. Lyralei felt Theron's power merge with hers like rivers flowing together, and suddenly her awareness exploded outward. Instead of sensing just the fortress and its immediate surroundings, she could feel every heartbeat in the valley below, every spark of fear and determination and doubt that flickered through the minds of Cassius's army. Now, Theron whispered, his voice strained with the effort of containing so much raw power. Together, they reached out across the darkness and began to speak directly to the hearts of their enemies. Why are you here? The question flowed through the minds of every wolf in the valley, carried not by voice but by pure emotion. What are you really fighting for? Some minds slammed shut against the intrusion, protected by years of mental discipline and absolute loyalty to the old ways. But others, hundreds of others, opened like flowers to the dawn. You're here because you were told the Cursed One would destroy everything you hold dear. But what if she could save it instead? What if the prophecy doesn't speak of destruction but transformation? Doubt bloomed like wildfire through the ranks. Soldiers who had marched with absolute certainty began to question, to wonder, to imagine a different future than the one Cassius had painted for them. Look around you. Look at the wolves beside you. Are they your enemies? Are they the ones you should be fighting? Or are you all victims of the same fear, the same resistance to change that has kept you divided for centuries? The emotional feedback was overwhelming. Hundreds of individual voices cried out in Lyralei's mind. Confusion, hope, anger, recognition. She could feel herself beginning to fracture under the strain, her consciousness spreading too thin across too many connections. But then Theron's power wrapped around hers like protective armor, holding her together when she would have shattered into 1,000 pieces. The choice is yours, they projected together, their combined will reaching even the most heavily shielded minds. You can fight for a future built on fear and division, or you can help build something better, something worthy of the next generation. The response was immediate and chaotic. Across the valley, arguments broke out as soldiers turned to their companions with questions that had no easy answers. Unit cohesion began to break down as wolves chose sides not based on pack loyalty, but on personal conviction. It's working, Theron gasped, blood running from his nose as the strain of projecting so much power took its toll. But Cassius is rallying his core supporters. We need to— A thunderous roar cut through the night as the Alpha's voice, magically amplified, echoed off the mountain walls. Enough! Cassius's fury was a palpable thing, rolling across the valley like a wave of pure rage. You let them into your heads. You let the Cursed One poison your minds with doubt and weakness. The spell broke. Hundreds of connections snapped simultaneously as Cassius's overwhelming presence forced the doubting wolves back into line. Lyralei cried out as the psychic backlash hit her, and only Theron's arms around her kept her from collapsing. We gave them a choice, he said through gritted teeth, his own body shaking from the effort they'd just expended. Now we'll see what they do with it. Below them, the Council's army was in chaos. Perhaps half the force remained in formation, their loyalty to the old ways unshaken by the emotional assault. But the other half was fragmenting, wolves breaking ranks to argue with their commanders or simply walking away from the approaching battle. Seize the Cursed One! Cassius's magically enhanced voice boomed across the valley. Bring me her head. And this ends now. The remaining loyal forces surged forward, their battle cries echoing off the fortress walls. But they were no longer 800 strong. Barely 400 wolves charged up the mountain slope, while behind them, their former allies watched in stunned silence or actively worked to stop them. Now we fight, Theron said, drawing his sword. The blade sang as it cleared its sheath, and Lyralei could feel the power humming through the steel. Are you ready? Lyralei looked out at the approaching army, then at the man beside her who had given her purpose, training, and something she'd never dared hope for, a future worth fighting for. I'm ready, she said, and meant it. The battle for the Obsidian Fortress had begun. The fortress shook under the impact of the first assault as Cassius's remaining forces crashed against the ancient walls like a tide of fury and steel. From the battlements, Lyralei watched siege ladders bloom against the black stone, while battering rams thundered against the gates below. Eastern wall is holding, Cale reported, his sword already red with the blood of the first wave of attackers. But they're coming up fast on the south side. How many made it through the gates? Theron asked, parrying a strike from a council warrior who had managed to scale the walls. Too many, Vera replied grimly from her position near the tower entrance. They're in the lower levels now, fighting through the corridors. The battle was chaos incarnate, steel clashing against steel, the roars of shifted wolves mixing with human war cries. And through it all, the overwhelming crush of emotions from hundreds of combatants pressed against Lyralei's consciousness like a physical weight. I can help, she said, reaching for the power that thrummed in her veins. I can turn their rage against them, make them too angry to fight effectively. Don't, Theron warned, spinning to block another attacker. Save your strength. Cassius isn't here yet, and when he arrives, his words were cut off as an explosion rocked the fortress, sending chunks of black stone raining down into the courtyard. Through the breach came a figure that made even the battling wolves pause in recognition and fear. Alpha Cassius Bloodmere had abandoned all pretense of civilized warfare. His human form was gone, replaced by something that was more monster than wolf. 9 feet of muscle and fury, with fangs like daggers and eyes that burned with inner fire. This wasn't just his shifted form. This was something deeper, older, more primal. Where is she? He roared, his voice carrying easily over the din of battle. Where is the cursed one who dares corrupt my soldiers? Here, Lyralei called out, stepping to the edge of the battlement despite Theron's grab for her arm. I'm right here. Cassius's burning gaze fixed on her, and she felt the full weight of his hatred like a physical blow. You think you can hide behind stone walls and loyal dogs? You think your curse makes you untouchable? I think it makes me dangerous enough that you brought an army to face one girl, she replied, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. That says more about your fear than my power. Fear? Cassius threw back his massive head and laughed, a sound like breaking bones. I feel no fear, child, only disgust. You are a corruption, a poison in the bloodline of our people, and like all poisons, you must be purged. He launched himself upward with impossible strength, his claws finding purchase in the fortress walls as he climbed toward her with deadly purpose. Around them, the battle seemed to slow as wolves on both sides turned to watch the confrontation that would decide everything. Lyralei, get back, Theron ordered, moving to intercept the climbing Alpha. No, she said firmly. This is what we trained for. This is why I'm here. She could feel Cassius's emotions now as he climbed. Not just hatred and disgust, but genuine terror. He was afraid of what she represented, afraid that the old ways he'd spent his life defending were already dead, and he was just too stubborn to admit it. When he reached the battlements, the confrontation was everything she'd expected, and nothing she was prepared for. Up close, his transformed state was even more terrifying. He radiated power like heat from a forge, and his very presence seemed to warp the air around him. Last chance, little curse, he growled, his voice distorted by his monstrous form. Kneel, submit to judgment, and I'll make your death quick. Counter offer, Lyralei replied, drawing on every lesson Theron had taught her. You kneel, submit to the future, and I'll let you live to see it. Cassius's response was a roar that shattered windows throughout the fortress. He lunged at her with claws extended, moving faster than anything his size had a right to move. But Lyralei was ready. Instead of dodging physically, she reached out with her power and grabbed hold of his emotions. The fear, the rage, the desperate need to maintain control, and turn them back on him amplified 1,000-fold. Cassius stumbled, his attack going wide as his own terror crashed into his mind like a physical wall. For just a moment, his monstrous form wavered, revealing glimpses of the frightened old man beneath. Impossible, he snarled, shaking his head to clear the mental fog. Your curse can't affect me. I'm protected by blood magic older than. Your blood magic protects you from mental manipulation, Lyralei agreed, circling him slowly. But it doesn't protect you from feeling your own emotions. And right now, you're absolutely terrified. I fear nothing. You fear everything. You fear change. You fear losing control. You fear discovering that you've spent your entire life fighting for something that was already lost. She could see her words hitting home, each truth landing like a physical blow. Most of all, you fear that I'm right, that the prophecy isn't about destruction at all, but about transformation. Enough! Cassius lunged again, but this time Theron intercepted him, his sword meeting the Alpha's claws in a shower of sparks. The two titans fought with savage intensity. Theron's supernatural speed and skill against Cassius's brute strength and primal fury. Steel rang against claw, and both combatants bled from wounds that would have felled lesser beings. But even as they battled, Lyralei could feel something changing in the fortress around them. The emotions of every person present were shifting, evolving, as her confrontation with Cassius laid bare the truth they'd all been avoiding. The old ways were dying. The question now was, what would replace them? You cannot stop what's coming, she called out, her voice carrying to every corner of the battlements. The prophecy was never about one person destroying or saving the world. It was about giving people the power to choose their own destiny. Several of Cassius's remaining soldiers hesitated, their weapons lowering as doubt crept in. The emotional tide was turning, and everyone could feel it. Seeing his support crumbling, Cassius roared in fury and unleashed a blast of raw power that sent Theron flying backward to crash against the tower wall. The Alpha King hit the stone with bone-crushing force and slid to the ground, his sword clattering away across the battlements. Theron! Lyralei started toward him, but Cassius blocked her path. Now you die! The monstrous Alpha snarled, raising his claws for the killing blow. But as his strike descended, something extraordinary happened. The doubt and hope Lyralei had planted in the minds of the council's soldiers finally bloomed into action. Dozens of wolves, both those who had come to attack the fortress and those defending it, surged forward as one. They didn't fight each other. They fought together, united in their determination to stop Cassius from destroying the future they were all beginning to glimpse. "Stand down!" one of the council soldiers shouted, his sword pressed to Cassius's throat. "This ends now." "You dare?" Cassius roared, but his voice carried more shock than rage. "You dare betray your own Alpha?" "We're not betraying you," another soldier replied, and Lyralei could feel the certainty flowing from his mind. "We're saving you from yourself." Cassius looked around at the circle of weapons pointed at him, weapons held by wolves who had followed him into battle but now refused to follow him into atrocity. For the first time since the confrontation began, his monstrous form began to shift back toward human. "This isn't over," he said finally, his voice raw with defeat and something that might have been relief. "The council will never accept her. They'll send others. Let them come," Theron said, struggling to his feet with blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. "By then, there might not be a council left to send anyone." "What do you mean?" Lyralei smiled, feeling the emotional currents flowing through not just the fortress, but the entire valley below. "Look around, Cassius. Really look. How many of your soldiers are still fighting? How many are still loyal to the old ways? The Alpha's eyes widened as he took in the scene around them. The battle had stopped. Everywhere he looked, wolves who had come as enemies were laying down their weapons, talking to their former opponents, beginning to imagine a different future. The transformation has already begun, Lyralei continued gently. Not through force or manipulation, but through choice, through hope. The very thing you came here to destroy has already spread beyond your ability to contain it. You've doomed us all, Cassius whispered. But there was no conviction in his words. No, she replied, extending her hand to him in a gesture of reconciliation that shocked everyone present. We've saved us all. The question now is whether you'll help build what comes next, or spend the rest of your life mourning what's already gone. For a long moment, the ancient Alpha stared at her outstretched hand. Then, slowly, he reached out and took it. The moment their skin touched, Lyralei felt the full weight of his fear, his regret, his desperate love for a world that was disappearing whether he fought against it or not. But beneath all that, she found something else, a tiny spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, change didn't have to mean destruction. What happens now? He asked quietly. Now, Theron said, moving to stand beside Lyralei. We all go home and figure out how to build a better world. 6 months after the Battle of Obsidian Fortress, Lyralei stood before the Great Assembly, the largest gathering of pack leaders in recorded history. Representatives from every territory had come to witness what many were calling the end of the old world and the birth of something entirely new. The venue itself was symbolic. Instead of meeting in one of the traditional Alpha strongholds, they had gathered in the neutral grounds, a vast meadow that belonged to no single pack, where ancient laws required all grievances to be set aside in favor of discussion and compromise. The question before us today, Theron announced, his voice carrying easily across the assembled thousands, is not whether change will come. Change is already here. The question is whether we will guide that transformation or be destroyed by it. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. 6 months of careful diplomacy had led to this moment, but Lyralei could still feel the undercurrents of uncertainty and fear flowing through the assembly. Many of these wolves had spent their entire lives believing that power came from dominance, that strength meant never showing weakness or doubt. The Moonshard prophecy spoke of one who would either unite the packs or destroy them. Alpha Darius called out from his position near the front of the gathering. We've seen her power demonstrated. The question now is what she intends to do with it. All eyes turned to Lyralei, and she felt the familiar weight of destiny settling on her shoulders. But this time, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like purpose. I intend, she said, stepping forward so her voice could reach every corner of the assembly, to give it away. The silence that followed was deafening. I don't understand, said Alpha Helena Swiftcurrent, one of the more progressive pack leaders who had been among the first to support the new order. Give it away to whom? To all of you, Lyralei replied. The curse that marks me is different, the power that everyone fears. It was never meant to be hoarded by one person. It's meant to be shared, to help everyone develop their own connection to the natural world, and to each other. That's impossible, Cassius interjected. Since the battle, he had become an unlikely ally, his defeat having taught him the futility of fighting inevitable change. The Moonshard Curse is bound to your bloodline. It can't be transferred. Not transferred, Lyralei agreed. Taught. What I've learned in the past months is that my curse isn't unique. It's just the most concentrated version of something we all possess. The ability to sense emotions, to influence the natural world, to connect with each other on a deeper level. I can teach others to develop those same abilities. To what end? Asked Alpha Magnus Ironhold, his scarred face skeptical. What's the point of giving everyone the power to read minds and manipulate feelings? To create a society where manipulation isn't necessary, Theron answered, moving to stand beside Lyralei. Where conflicts can be resolved through understanding instead of violence. Where the strong protect the weak instead of exploiting them. You're talking about fundamentally changing what it means to be a wolf. Another voice called out. Yes, Lyralei said simply. I am. The debate that followed lasted for hours. Some leaders were intrigued by the possibilities she described. A world where pack loyalty could be expanded to species loyalty, where the endless cycle of territorial disputes could be broken through genuine communication and mutual understanding. Others were horrified by the implications: the loss of traditional hierarchy, the erosion of pack identity, the unknown consequences of giving such power to those who might not be ready for it. But through it all, Lyralei could feel the slow shift in the collective consciousness of the assembly. Hope was spreading like wildfire through minds that had never dared to imagine a different way of living. The practical question, said Alpha Victoria Moonrunner, always the pragmatist, is leadership. If we're dissolving the traditional pack structure, if we're creating this new unified society, who leads it? We all do, Lyralei replied. That's the point. No more single rulers making decisions for everyone else. No more concentrating power in the hands of the few while the many suffer in silence. That sounds like chaos, Cassius observed, though his tone was more curious than condemning. Maybe. Or maybe it sounds like freedom. Lyralei looked around the assembly, meeting as many eyes as she could. I know it's terrifying. I know it goes against everything you've been taught about strength and leadership and survival. But I also know that the old ways were dying whether I came along or not. The question is whether we let them die in violence and chaos, or whether we help birth something better in their place. And if it fails? Alpha Magnus asked bluntly. If this grand experiment collapses into anarchy and bloodshed, then we'll deal with that together too, Theron said. But we won't know unless we try. The formal vote, when it finally came, was closer than Lyralei had hoped but more decisive than she had feared. By a margin of nearly 2-1, the Great Assembly voted to dissolve the traditional Council of Alphas and establish what they called the Unified Territories, a confederation of autonomous communities bound together by shared values rather than fear of mutual destruction. But it was the ceremony afterward that truly marked the end of one era and the beginning of another. As the sun set over the neutral grounds, Lyralei stood in a circle formed by every pack leader present. One by one, they approached her, and one by one, she shared with them a small portion of her curse-born abilities. Not enough to make them as powerful as she was. That would have been dangerous for everyone involved. But enough to let them experience what she experienced, to feel the emotions of those around them, to sense the web of connection that linked all living things. This is what the world could be, she whispered to each of them as the power flowed between them. This is what we're fighting for. Some wept as the connection was established. Others laughed with joy at the sudden expansion of their awareness. A few were overwhelmed and had to be gently brought back to themselves by those who had already undergone the process, but all of them were changed. When it was over, when the last pack leader had received their portion of the gift, Lyralei swayed on her feet from exhaustion. Sharing her abilities hadn't weakened her. If anything, she felt stronger, more complete, as if the curse had finally found its true purpose. How do you feel? Theron asked, catching her as she stumbled slightly. Different, she replied, leaning into his warmth. Like I'm finally who I was always meant to be. And what's that? She smiled, looking out at the assembly that was slowly dispersing, not as separate packs returning to isolated territories, but as members of a new community learning to see each other as family rather than rivals. Free, she said simply. For the first time in my life, I feel completely free. 1 year later, Lyralei stood in the garden of what had once been the obsidian fortress and marveled at how much had changed. The black stone walls remained, but they were now covered in climbing vines heavy with silver flowers that bloomed year-round. The intimidating spires had been converted into observatories and libraries, places of learning rather than symbols of isolated power. The morning reports, my lady, Vera Moonwhisper said. approaching with a stack of documents that would have once detailed threats and conflicts between rival packs. Now they contained updates on construction projects, educational initiatives, and collaborative efforts to heal the environmental damage caused by centuries of territorial warfare. "How many times do I have to tell you not to call me my lady?" Lyralei asked with fond exasperation. "At least once more, apparently," Vera replied with a smile. "Old habits die hard." Speaking of old habits, how is our former council speaker adapting to his new role? Alpha Cassius? Better than expected, actually. His experience with traditional pack politics has proven invaluable in helping communities transition to the new systems, though I think he still struggles with the collaborative decision-making process. Lyralei nodded, not surprised. The transformation she had initiated wasn't complete, might never be complete. Changing the fundamental structure of society was the work of generations, not seasons. But the foundation was solid, and more importantly, it was growing stronger every day. Any word from the Eastern Territories? 3 more communities have requested integration into the unified territories. They've heard about our success with conflict resolution and resource sharing, and they want to learn our methods. And the resistance movements? Vera's expression sobered slightly. Still active in the far northern regions, Alpha Grimjaw continues to insist that the old ways were better, and he's gathered a following of those who feel displaced by the changes. But their numbers are dwindling. It's hard to argue against prosperity and peace when you're living in isolation and scarcity. A warm presence behind her made Lyralei smile before she even turned around. She could sense Theron's emotions as clearly as her own now, a side effect of their deepening bond and her expanded abilities. "The morning council meeting went well," he reported, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. "The water rights dispute between the Silverbrook and Thornbark communities has been resolved. Turns out it was just a misunderstanding about seasonal usage patterns." "Resolved how?" "Joint management of the resource with shared maintenance responsibilities. Both communities get what they need, and they're actually planning a harvest festival together to celebrate the agreement." Lyralei leaned back against his chest, feeling the contentment that radiated from him. A year ago, such a simple resolution would have been impossible. Territorial disputes over resources had been a primary cause of the pack wars that had raged for centuries. Now, with the ability to sense each other's true intentions and emotions, most conflicts were resolved through communication rather than violence. "There's something else," Theron continued, his voice taking on a note she'd learned to recognize. "Something I wanted to discuss with you." Oh? What kind of something?" Instead of answering directly, he turned her in his arms, so they were facing each other. In the morning sunlight, his silver eyes seemed to glow with inner fire, and she could feel the complex tangle of his emotions: love, nervousness, hope, and a deep certainty that made her pulse quicken. "Lyralei," he began, then stopped, seeming to struggle with words for the first time since she'd known him. "Theron, what?" she broke off as he dropped to one knee, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "You transformed my world," he said quietly, his voice carrying the same power that had once commanded armies but now spoke only of love. "You took a monster who thought he was destined for isolation and showed him what it meant to be part of something larger than himself. You gave me purpose, hope, and a future I never dared to imagine." Lyralei's hands flew to her mouth as he opened the box, revealing a ring unlike anything she'd ever seen. The band was wrought from silver and some darker metal twisted together like vines, and the stone, gods. The stone was a piece of crystallized moonlight that seemed to pulse with the same rhythm as her curse mark. "Will you marry me?" he asked simply. "Will you be my partner not just in ruling these territories, but in building the future we've both dreamed of?" "Yes," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Yes, of course, yes." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Lyralei felt something shift in the world around them. Not physically. The garden remained the same. The sun continued to shine. The silver flowers continued to bloom. But emotionally, spiritually, Something clicked into place that had been missing before. Through their connection, she could sense his joy, his relief, his overwhelming love. But more than that, she could sense the rightness of the moment, the feeling that this was exactly what was supposed to happen, exactly what the prophecy had been building toward all along. "I love you," she said as he stood and gathered her in his arms. "I love you too," he replied, kissing her with a passion that sent sparks through her entire being. "My queen, my partner, my curse breaker, curse maker," she corrected with a smile against his lips. "Remember? I gave the curse away. To everyone. Best decision you ever made." "Second best," she said, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. "The best was trusting you when you asked me to step into that testing circle all those months ago. Have I mentioned lately that you're brilliant? Only every day. But I don't mind hearing it again." They were interrupted by a commotion from the courtyard below. Not the sound of conflict, but of celebration. Looking down, they could see that word of their engagement had already begun to spread through the fortress. People were emerging from buildings, flowers were being gathered, and someone had started playing music. "I think they approve," Theron observed with amusement. "I think they're ready for a party," Lyralei replied. "And after everything we've all been through, we deserve one." As they made their way down to join the impromptu celebration, Lyralei reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. A year ago, she had been a broken girl who believed she was worthless, abandoned by the only family she'd ever known, and convinced that her curse made her a danger to everyone around her. Now she was surrounded by people who saw her not as cursed but as blessed, not as dangerous but as transformative. She had a mate who loved her completely, a purpose that fulfilled her utterly, and a future that stretched out bright and full of possibility. The prophecy had spoken of one who would either unite the packs or destroy them, but like so many prophecies, it had missed the most important truth of all, that sometimes the greatest transformation comes not from grand gestures or apocalyptic events, but from the simple decision to choose love over fear, connection over isolation, hope over despair. As the celebration swirled around them, as friends and allies gathered to share in their joy, Lyralei looked up at the man who had helped her discover her true strength and smiled. "What are you thinking about?" Theron asked, following her gaze. "Fairy tales," she replied, remembering the bitter words she'd carried in her heart when this all began. "I used to think they were lies designed to give people false hope. And now? Now I think they're promises. Glimpses of what's possible when we're brave enough to believe in better endings." Theron's smile was soft and real and full of love. "I like that version better." "So do I," Lyralei said, and meant it completely. Around them, the celebration continued as the sun climbed higher into the sky, bringing light and warmth to a world that had finally learned the difference between fairy tales and the even more miraculous reality of choosing to make dreams come true. And in that moment, surrounded by love and laughter and the promise of all the tomorrows yet to come, Lyralei knew that her story, their story, was just beginning.